Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. Israel says its tanks have targeted multiple locations on the Gaza Strip. The Israeli Defense Ministry says it struck Hamas posts in retaliation to incendiary balloon attacks. The raids come after dozens of Palestinian states protest against the occupying forces along the border fence. India has reported 941 COVID-19 deaths overnight, taking the country's toll to nearly 51,000. Meanwhile, Brazil has registered 620 fatalities and over 23,000 infections in a day. In Pakistan, 7 people have died and 488 tested positive in the past 24 hours, while more than 269,000 have recovered so far. Globally, the pandemic has infected over 21.6 million people and claimed more than 774,000 lives. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has delayed the general elections by 4 weeks to October 17th after a new coronavirus outbreak. Speaking at a news conference in Wellington, Ardern said the delay will give sufficient time for parties to plan campaigns accordingly. The Japanese economy has shrunk at its fastest rate on record as the country fights to control the COVID-19 pandemic. The world's third largest economy shrank an annualized 27.8% during April to June from the previous quarter. Japan is already struggling with the low economic growth even before the pandemic. In football, Sevilla have reached the final of the Europa League after beating Manchester United by 2-1 in Cologne. Sevilla striker Luke de Jong scored the winning goal in the 78th minute to seal the victory. News coming up in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back now with the news in detail. We start our news bulletin from Israel, which says its tanks have targeted multiple locations on the Gaza Strip. The Israeli Defense Ministry says it struck Hamas posts in retaliation to incendiary balloon attacks. The raids come after dozens of Palestinians staged protests against the occupying forces along the border fence. No casualties have been reported from the raid so far. Meanwhile, Israeli forces also shot and wounded a Palestinian in Bethlehem. The Defense Ministry says the forces opened fire near Rashel's tomb in the city. Israeli strikes on Palestine have accelerated since the signing of peace agreements with the United Arab Emirates last week. Meanwhile, the United Arab Emirates has summoned Iran's ambassador in Abu Dhabi in response to a speech by President Hassan Rouhani. This comes after Rouhani said the UAE made a huge mistake by signing an agreement with Israel and called it betrayal by the Gulf state. In a statement, state media said the UAE's foreign ministry called Rouhani's speech unacceptable and inflammatory. It said the remarks by Iran's president can lead to serious repercussions for Gulf region security. The UAE statement said the ministry considers Rouhani's speech interference in the country's internal affairs and an assault on its sovereignty. Meanwhile, the Secretary General of the 6-member Gulf Cooperation Council has also condemned Iran's remarks towards the UAE over accord with Israel. There has been no response from Tehran yet. Moving on, Iraq says a Katyusha rocket has struck Baghdad's heavily fortified Green Zone, which houses foreign missions, including the U.S. consulate. The military said the rocket was fired from an abandoned military base in southeastern Baghdad. It said there were no significant losses. The military added Iraqi security forces seized 2 other rockets at the launch site. The attack was at least the 9th within a week, which was apparently aimed at U.S. interests in Iraq. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack. Moving on, Brazil has registered 620 deaths from the COVID-19 and over 23,000 infections in the past 24 hours. While in the United States, more than 170,000 people have lost their lives to the coronavirus, with over 5.4 million confirmed cases. Globally, the pandemic has infected over 21.6 million people and claimed more than 775,000 lives. This report has more.
With thousands of deaths and infections every day, the coronavirus continues to overwhelm healthcare systems across the world. In the U.S., top infection disease expert Anthony Fauci says any attempt to attain herd immunity will result in massive death tolls in the country. Despite reporting the second highest death toll and infection tally in the region, Mexico says a vaccine can be made available by the first quarter of 2021. Brazilian First Lady Michelle Bolsonaro has tested negative for the virus after testing positive 2 weeks prior. While down under, Australia reported its deadliest day of the pandemic with 25 fatalities in the past 24 hours.
We've got a common challenge here, and whilst there is a trend that is positive, today's a very sad day for 25 families, and this is a long way from over.
In Europe, the second wave is surging in many countries, including Germany and France. Meanwhile, in Spain, thousands took to the streets to protest against the mandatory use of face masks in public spaces.
I'm here because there are too many repressive measures. They are taking all our rights away from us. In my opinion, the face mask should have been used during the pandemic, but not now.
In Asia, mainland China reported 22 new cases of the virus in the past 24 hours, while in South Korea, 197 fresh cases were registered. Meanwhile, Malaysia has detected a mutation of the COVID-19 virus in the country.
Moreover, in India, the deaths from COVID-19 have neared 51,000 as the country reported 941 deaths in the past 24 hours. The Health Ministry says 57,982 new cases were recorded overnight, taking the country's caseload over 2.6 million. It said there are still over 676,000 active cases in the country. The ministry said the 2 states, Maharashtra and Tamil Nadu, make up 40% of all the confirmed cases. India is the 3rd worst hit country from the virus after US and Brazil. Meanwhile, Pakistan is witnessing a downward trend in the new COVID-19 cases as health experts believe in the country's promising survival rate. The Health Ministry said over 90% of the patients have recovered from the virus so far. The ministry said 7 people have died while 488 people tested positive in the past 24 hours. The country's death toll has risen to 6,175 while the infections are over 289,000. The ministry said the number of active cases has reduced to over 13,000. Sindh remains the worst hit province with over 126,000 infections, while Punjab has reported more than 95,000 cases. Moving on to New Zealand, where Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has delayed the general election till October 17th after a second wave of COVID-19. Speaking at a news conference in Wellington, Ardern said the 4-week delay will give sufficient time for parties to plan campaigns accordingly. She said these decisions are still subject to scrutiny by the Parliament. Ardern said she had absolutely no intention of allowing any further delays to the vote. She said the postponement will also help the Election Commission finalise results.
I have decided on balance to move the election by 4 weeks to the 17th of October. At the end of last week, I was advised that this date is achievable and presents no greater risk than had we retained the status quo. I've also been advised that in moving to a 17 October election day, the Commission will be able to leverage and draw on much of the work already undertaken to deliver the election.
Well, the opposition parties had sought a delay after the outbreak prompted the government last week to put Auckland under a 2-week lockdown. Now moving on, tens of thousands of protesters took to the streets in the Belarusian capital Minsk against President Alexander Lukashenko. The March for Freedom comes amid growing anger over alleged poll rigging and police violence at subsequent protests. More details in this report.
Belarus is navigating one of the biggest political crises in its post-Soviet history after the opposition rejected official results of the presidential elections. In the biggest protest so far, the demonstrators chanting "Step down" filled the center of the capital. Leading the protest, opposition politician Maria Kolesnikova asked President Alexander Lukashenko to quit and appealed to the state officials to abandon him.
Everyone who used violence against demonstrators and other citizens in the streets, in police trucks and later in the police stations and detention centers must be held responsible in accordance with the law of the Republic of Belarus.
Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko, speaking at a rally of his supporters in Minsk, rejected calls to hold a new presidential elections. He called the opponents as rats and urged his supporters to defend their country and independence. President Lukashenko also accused NATO of massing on his country's western border, which the alliance has dismissed, saying it is closely monitoring the situation in the country.
NATO tanks and jets are on standby within 15 minutes reach of our borders. This is not for nothing. NATO forces are rattling tank tracks at our doors. Military power is building up on the western border of our country. Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, and unfortunately our brother Ukraine, its leadership are telling us to hold a new election.
Meanwhile, France's President Emmanuel Macron tweeted that the European Union should support peaceful demonstrations in Belarus. German Vice-Chancellor and Finance Minister Olaf Scholz described the Belarusian leader as a dictator. He warned Moscow against intervening to keep Lukashenko in power. Russia has said it will offer Belarus military help if necessary.
Now in Somalia, at least 16 people have been killed and over a dozen others injured in a gun and bomb attack by Al-Shabaab militants on a beachfront hotel in the capital, Mogadishu. The Information Ministry said security forces ended the 4-hour-long siege after killing the last attacker. It said special forces rescued 205 people, including the hotel owner and government officials. A government spokesperson said 5 of the people killed were the attackers, while 1 police officer was killed in the rescue operation. Earlier, Al-Shabaab claimed responsibility for the attack in a statement posted online. Now, in Colombia, 8 people have been shot dead by unknown gunmen in a drug trafficking area in Nariño province near the border with Ecuador. Police said attackers wore balaclavas to cover their faces and carried long-range weapons. Colombian President Ivan Duque has condemned the attack. He blamed it on the presence of militias and drug trafficking groups in the area. He said 2 arrests have been made and these facts will be clarified later. Now, 4 people have been killed while 14 others wounded in a spat of shootings across the American city of Cincinnati. The bloodshed began at midnight after 3 people were shot in the Walnut Hills neighborhood. Police also responded to 2 other shooting reports in the Avondale area over the Rhine neighborhood during the night. Police did not provide details about the 4th fatal shooting, but confirmed that it occurred on the city's west end. They said the shootings seem to be separate incidents, but horrific and tragic. No suspect information has been made available by the police in any of the cases. More news coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now moving on with the news stories. Pakistan's Commissioner for the Developing Aid bloc, Tariq Karim, says the government's smart lockdown policy has led to a significant improvement in the coronavirus situation. He was speaking at a virtual session of the D8 Organization for Economic Cooperation, which was co-chaired by Turkey and Bangladesh. He highlighted Prime Minister Imran Khan's initiatives to combat the pandemic, including the $8 billion relief package for vulnerable groups. He said Pakistan is ready to further support for a global coordinated response to the pandemic. Pakistan is a founding member and key contributor to the D8 activities. Meanwhile, 63 people have died so far from the torrential rains and floods in Sudan since July, with thousands forced to flee their homes. The Interior Ministry said over 14,000 homes and 119 public buildings were destroyed. Heavy rains usually fall in Sudan from June to October, and it faces severe flooding every year. The UN Office for Humanitarian Affairs estimates that over 185,000 people have been affected by the floods, with more rainfall expected in coming months. The OCHA said 17 out of 18 states across the country have been affected by flooding and landslides. The states of GAZA and Kassala remain the most affected in the east of the North African country. Huqiao city in eastern China's Xinjiang province has achieved sustainable, high-quality and eco-friendly development. The city has been improved under the guidance of President Xi Jinping's concept of green development over the past 15 years when he was Xinjiang's party head. More about the eco-friendly city in this report.
China's President Xi Jinping proposed the theory of lucid waters and lush mountains as invaluable assets for the first time in 2005. Since then, Huqiao city in the country's east has integrated the theory into its economic, political, cultural, social and ecological development. This has not only improved the local environment but also brought remarkable economic gains to the local people. Pan Chinlin, who runs an agritainment business in the village, said he can receive over 200 visitors every day at present.
We can see picturesque sceneries by opening our windows and meet endless streams of guests once opening our gate. This is the happy life created by the President Xi Jinping's theory of lucid waters, and lush mountains are invaluable assets.
Though influenced by COVID-19, the local tourism is picking up once again now that the epidemic is under control and the national economy is recovering. But the environment of the Yusun village, as well as the Huqiao city, used to be badly damaged 15 years ago due to excessive exploitation of mineral resources. Under the guidance of Xi's theory, Huqiao city abandoned the extensive mode of development and began to search for industrial transformation and upgrading.
Every year, we would select at least 2 industries and carry out across-the-board upgrading according to the latest green and low-carbon standards. As for energy-intensive and high-polluting projects, no matter how large their scale or how profitable they are, we will not allow their operation whatsoever.
With 15 years of environment restoration, Huqiao has become China's first prefecture-level pilot demonstration zone for ecological civilization construction.
In southwest China, the world's oldest panda in captivity celebrated its 38th birthday in the zoo of Chongqing municipality. Her age is comparable to a human age of about 110 to 140 years old. More in this report.
Xinjiang, the giant panda, is celebrating her birthday at a zoo in China. She is among less than the 30 pandas in captivity that have an age of over 30. Many local residents and fans came to the zoo to jointly make a big cake out of various fruits and bamboo shoots and leaves and sing birthday songs. Despite her great age, Xinjiang maintained a good body with her weight controlled at 95 to 100 kgs. The Chongqing Zoo specially made a recipe for her age to let her have more meals a day but less food at each.
We have 3 to 4 staff members taking care of her, and other staff offer help at any time. We usually cut bamboo leaves into pieces before feeding her. We want to maintain Xinjiang's weight at a suitable level so as to prevent such diseases as obesity, hypertension, high cholesterol and high blood sugar, among others.
Chongqing is known as an oven city during summer. To fend off the summer heat, zoo staff only let Xinjiang go outside the panda house in the morning or evening.
We have built a pond outdoors so that she can swim in it. We also often prepare cooling foods for her to eat, such as watermelons.
Xinjiang has given birth to 10 baby pandas so far. As of the end of 2019, she had 153 descendants who live in more than 20 countries and regions, including Canada, America, Japan and China's Taiwan, Hong Kong and Shanghai.
Now, the Japanese economy has shrunk at its fastest rate on record as the country fights to control the COVID-19 pandemic. The world's third largest economy shrank an annualized 27.8% during April to June from the previous quarter. Japan saw its gross domestic product fall by 7.8% in the second quarter. The slump marks the biggest decline for Japan's economy since comparable data became available in 1980. One of the main factors behind the slump was a severe decrease in domestic consumption, which accounts for more than half of Japan's economy. Exports also fell sharply as global trade took a hit by the pandemic.
We declared a state of emergency in April and May, when it was weighed heavily for the April to June quarter. We have artificially stopped economic activities, so this tough result comes from that impact.
Well, Japan was already struggling with the low economic growth even before the pandemic. Now, Asian markets are trading mixed as concerns over escalating tensions between the US and China weigh on investor sentiment. Investors are pushing cautious rally as they also follow the latest developments surrounding a potential vaccine for COVID-19. Japan's Nikkei 225 is trading lower by nearly 1%. Shanghai Composite is trading high by over 2%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index gained 1.28%. Markets in South Korea are closed today for a holiday. Meanwhile, international benchmark Brent crude oil price has gained over 0.5%. And now let's have a look at the weather updates across the globe. Well, that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News. Take care.